Congressman Jake Auchincloss is our guest. Let's go on the record. A leading voice in the push against TikTok and the tensions between the U.S. and China, his priorities in an election year, and the prospects for Democrats to take back the House. Time to go on the record.
WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
And welcome everybody to OTR. I'm Ben Cimino, along with News Center 5's political reporter Sharman Sacchetti. Ed Harding off on this St. Patrick's Day. With us at the table, Massachusetts Congressman Jake Auchincloss. He's a Democrat from Newton, representing the state's 4th congressional district, seeking a 3rd term this November. A member of the Select Committee on China. He's a Marine, commanding infantry in Afghanistan in 2012. He also holds degrees from Harvard and MIT. Congressman, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Good morning. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Thanks. All right, so let's talk about TikTok. You co-sponsored the bill that would have required TikTok be banned in this country unless its parent company sold. There are 170 million users in the United States. Its current owner, ByteDance, is based in China. The House bill, it passed with bipartisan support. Its future, though, is uncertain in the Senate. You're one of the most informed members on Congress regarding issues regarding China. So let's start out with, why do you think this legislation is so essential?
You're right that I was a co-sponsor and worked hard to get this passed in the House, and it passed with a big bipartisan majority, which I think is a testament to how seriously lawmakers are taking this. There's 2 dimensions to TikTok. One is the United States versus China. And I do have concerns about having a real-time social graph of 170 million Americans available to the Chinese Communist Party and their ability to manipulate information and to access personally identifiable information. But that was actually my secondary concern. My primary concern is not about USA versus China. It's about families versus the greed of social media corporations. For the last 20 years, these social media corporations, American and Chinese alike, have been platforming disinformation. They have been corroding youth mental health. They have been undermining local journalism, and they are not held to account. It is time for Congress to hold these companies to account, and the first step is holding them subject to U.S. law. So we've got to require TikTok be subject to U.S. law, and then we can take them on.
TikTok users, they have been very upset about this idea of a ban. Do you think that people understand or care about these security issues? It seems as though most Americans familiar with social media understand they give up some security information.
It's not a ban, it's a forced sale, and I expect that TikTok would continue to operate under U.S. law. And when I look at Americans' transactions of their personally identifiable information or about information about themselves with these companies, what's important to me when we're talking about adults is that they just have informed consent. And people can make up their own minds about how much they share with Amazon or Facebook in order to get convenience or salient advertising. My particular concern, though, is around kids. What we have seen since 2012 in particular is that when the iPhone and social networks became ubiquitous, youth mental health plummeted, boys and girls. And we're continuing to see real concerns from families and from students about their sense of self, about their socio-emotional development. And these companies are profiting by selling off their attention spans to advertisers. They need to be held accountable as good, responsible corporate citizens.
So you talk about U.S. law, but let's be honest, there's very little regulation under U.S. law of any social media companies. And wouldn't this just serve to make Meta, frankly, if a lot of folks then migrate to Instagram, even bigger? Should there be A, more regulation, and B, should a company like Meta be broken up?
There should absolutely be more regulation. With social media, there's strong network effects that make breaking these companies up hard to do, although I'm certainly open to it under FTC investigations. But the primary step is stronger social media regulations. Let me give you one example. This is a bill I filed last week. It would raise the age of internet adulthood from 13 to 16 years old, and it would be enforceable, which it previously has not been.
Can you just explain to people internet adulthood? What are you talking about there?
In the 1990s, when the internet was coming alive, Congress passed its initial laws, and it said that at the age of 13 years old, for purposes of online experiences, an individual is an adult. They can transact, they can engage online as an adult. And I think any parent listening to this right now would say no.
Yeah.
It's time for Congress to get with the program and require that these companies, in a privacy-protected way, verify age and then keep parents in the loop for what's happening. Because as we've seen from these attorneys general investigations of these social media companies' behavior, they do not have the best interests of kids at heart.
All right, 65 votes against the bill. 4 of them were from the Massachusetts delegation. Whip Catherine Clark was among those who voted no against this bill. Ayanna Pressley as well. Here's what she said, quote, quote, instead of targeting a single company in a rushed and restricted process, Congress should pass comprehensive data privacy legislation that creates standards and regulations around data harvesting across all social media companies. Adding this, quote, I also have serious concerns about the First Amendment implications of a ban on TikTok. What's your response to that?
So first, on the comprehensive privacy regulations, totally agree. I would just add that the first step to doing comprehensive social media regulation is to ensure that all the social media companies are subject to U.S. law. If we do it for Meta and Twitch and Discord and Instagram, and we don't do it for TikTok because they're not subject to our law, then it's not comprehensive. So this is step one to get to step two. And then on the First Amendment, I've been in public office for 10 years. I've defended some very unpopular speech. This is not a First Amendment concern. There's a distinction between freedom of speech and freedom of reach. Americans can post anything they want, anywhere they want it, within the political domain. They can criticize Biden, they can criticize Trump, they can criticize me. Freedom of speech is not freedom of reach. You do not have the constitutional right to have your post amplified to 100 million people courtesy of the Chinese Communist Party. There is no civil liberty for an algorithm owned by the Politburo.
All right.
Different things.
Let's move on to Haiti, which is in a state of chaos and collapse right now. Gangs have become the de facto government. Many of those who can flee are seeking asylum here in the United States, and many migrants are now here in the greater Boston area. This human crisis is costing billions here in Massachusetts. Beacon Hill has pointed fingers at the delegation for not doing enough to help. How do you respond to that? Do you think the delegation is doing enough to help?
Congress is not doing enough to help, for sure. And Congress hasn't acted on immigration for the last 30 years. There was negotiated in the Senate a bipartisan border security deal that would have enforced stronger measures at the border to prevent trafficking in between the ports of entry, while also streamlining visa and asylum systems so that we would have better due process through the ports of entry. It would also have provided funding for states like Massachusetts that are buckling under the strain of providing shelter and services for migrants. I strongly supported that bipartisan border security bill, and I'm ready to vote for it if it comes to the House floor.
Do you think the delegation has advocated enough for the state in this world? Because it seems as though leaders on Beacon Hill don't see it that way.
I understand their frustration. I would point to two ways the delegation is trying to help. One is the Medicaid waiver that would allow some Medicaid funding to be used for shelter and services programming. That's going to be a big impact for the state, and I have seen the entire delegation align behind that. The second is on cutting the red tape around work authorizations for migrants who are here. I visited these migrant shelters. I know that the people who are coming here want to work, and we've got the jobs for them, but they can't wait 6 months to get that job.
All right, let's talk about another humanitarian crisis, the one that's still ongoing in Gaza. The U.S. now trying to take a more active role to bring supplies in. President Biden has been critical of Israel's actions in the war with Hamas, especially as it pertains to innocent civilians. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer last week called for new elections in Israel. Is Benjamin Netanyahu a roadblock to peace and a two-state solution?
The primary roadblock to peace is Hamas. Hamas has rejected a temporary ceasefire that would help the Palestinian people because it wants to hold on to the hostages, of which there are women and children amongst them, in their underground terror tunnels. Hamas is an internationally recognized terrorist organization that is the primary impediment to a lasting peace. It has violated 5 previous ceasefires. It has promised it would violate a 6th ceasefire, and until they are dismantled, we will not get the lasting peace that the region deserves.
Thousands of civilians have been killed in the Gaza Strip under these Israeli attacks. So what's the end game here?
The end game is post-war governance for Gaza that does not include Hamas, and that provides basic services and economic development for the Palestinian people in keeping with their aspirations for a state of their own.
And there's also a move to split up the aid bill. Ukraine aid in one package, Israeli aid in a different package, and put strings on the aid to Israel. Do you support that?
I support anything that would get the Senate bill passed. The Senate passed a comprehensive national security package with 70-30, and the House has not acted on it because Speaker Johnson is too afraid of Donald Trump to do the right thing. If Speaker Johnson wants to do it in, limerick format on the House floor, I don't care. I want this bill passed.
Now, Schumer has called for new elections in Israel. Do you support that?
If I were a member of the Knesset in Israel, I would be breaking from the Netanyahu coalition and trying to force elections. I'm not. I'm a member of Congress. And the United States and the Israeli people share a bond of democracy. And the core of democracy is that people decide for themselves when elections are necessary.